So you have to write an introduction and you don't know what to do. Often the introduction's easiest to write once you've already written the body of your paper. By that time, you know your argument inside and out, and you just need a way to get your reader to connect to what you've written. The introduction is your first impression, and should purposefully provide context for your central argument. Really, the intro to a paper is like any good introduction in the real world. It extends a hand to the reader and places your argument in a context that's familiar and relatable. Your job is to establish some common ground, make connections between your audience and the subject, and gently lead the audience to your discussion of the text. Think of it like a funnel. An effective introduction takes a bigger idea and focuses it towards a concentrated result or output. That's your thesis. Introductions start with the common ground and move to a specific argument about a specific text. In the primer, you'll see this sketch. There are four main components of the introduction: the hook, the explain and relate, the one-sentence summary, and the thesis. Let's start with the hook. The hook's job, as I sort of led on before, is to grab the reader's attention and to establish common ground. Then comes the explain and relate. This is where you make connections between your hook and the text that you want to discuss. But wait, before you jump into your thesis, give a quick one-sentence summary of the text as it relates to your subject. Assume your reader has a working knowledge of the text. Finally, end the introduction with your thesis statement. See? 4 steps. Intro, done. And if it were really that easy, this is where the video would end. But usually that first sentence, the hook, is kind of a troublemaker. And often, it takes a while to come up with that perfect opening idea. So let's dig in a little deeper and think about hooks that work. With the hook, we're looking to preview the topic that you'll write about later in the paper. Whether your argument is about individualism, love, greed, humility, or social change, you'll need to find a way to get your reader pondering and connecting to that topic before you even drop the thesis. And no, I don't mean falling back on your old standbys. Googling a random quote from some author you've never heard of, or providing the dictionary definition for something that I'm pretty sure we can all define. Forget those strategies and think instead of how you'll connect your reader to your topic with purpose. Start with your topic or your human issue. What are you saying about that topic? What's your angle? Now, how might you pitch that angle to someone who's unfamiliar with the text that you're discussing? What does it remind you of? If you had to explain your ideas to an 8th grader, what metaphor would you use? You see me do this all the time in class. If I'm going to introduce you to the unfamiliar setting in The Scarlet Letter, I use the establishing shot at the start of the film Chocolat to help you connect and relate. That's a hook. Heck, when introducing introductions, I compared them to a funnel. That's a hook. Hooks come in many different forms, and often the strongest ones are intriguing anecdotes, startling statistics, relevant historical examples, catchy current events, extended metaphors, and short, provocative quotations. Now all we need is that bright, shining opening idea. So let's think about our sample essay from the primer on Alice Walker's short story, The Flowers. Remember our thesis statement? Once a child has witnessed cruelty and hatred, innocence is forever lost. Well, here's some questions we should consider in trying to craft a hook. First, what's the topic or human issue in my thesis statement? Our topic is innocence, and more specifically, what destroys innocence. So the next step is to relate this to something that the reader will be familiar with. We need an example that will establish common ground and will help the reader start thinking about childhood and innocence lost. So here's my next question. Has anything happened lately that deals with this same issue? Any recent news stories, historical events, or statistics? I'm sure that there are, unfortunately, tons of current examples of children witnessing cruelty and hatred, and as a result, experiencing a loss of childhood. But I'm thinking more of like a historical example that's a bit more connected to the context of the story. I remember learning about a young girl named Ruby Bridges, who was one of the first African American children to attend an integrated school. She grew up in New Orleans and was the subject of this Norman Rockwell painting. So Ruby grew up in the 1960s, and at age 6, she had to walk to school under the escort of the National Guard, who were supposed to be there to protect her safety. I'm imagining that little Ruby had to grow up pretty quickly and face the ugly realities of a racist America. I mean, just look at what's on the back wall. This seems like a pretty compelling story to use. But just in case I like something else better, let's keep asking all those hook questions. Another thing to consider is there any central image present in the text that I could riff off of? Well, central to the short story of the flowers are, well, the flowers themselves, a symbol of Myop's innocence. I could write an extended metaphor about the conditions needed for flowers to bloom, and somehow connect those to the conditions in the adult world that protect and nurture children. Or I could describe the delicate nature of a flower's petals, and maybe connect that to the idea of childhood being fragile. Assuming that we don't like any of those ideas, I could ask myself if there's a metaphor or anecdote that captures the abstract ideas that I'm presenting. Like, for example, the metaphor of a butterfly undergoing metamorphosis. What if the caterpillar is forced from its cocoon too soon? Maybe it won't be able to fly. In the same way, forcing the transition from childhood to adulthood too soon could have long-lasting and detrimental effects. Now that we have a bunch of ideas for the hook, let's go back to that pesky primer sketch to help us put all the pieces together. Let's start with the hook. I think I'll end up using the Ruby Bridges historical example. Then for the explain and relate, I need to explain how Ruby had to face cruelty and hatred at too young of an age, and how this led her to a loss of innocence. I'll relate that to Myop in the short story The Flowers, and then give a one-sentence summary of the moment she encounters cruelty and hatred, that moment where she stumbles upon the dead man's head in the woods. Then I'll end with my thesis. Okay, let's write. Here's my hook. The year was 1960. The city was Little Rock, Arkansas. At the fragile age of 6, Ruby Bridges, a young African-American girl, walked to school under the escort of the National Guard who were sent to protect her safety. Explain and relate. As one of the first 9 African-American children to integrate into the formerly all-white schools, Ruby had to face the realities of racial discrimination before even finishing the first grade. This abrupt end to Ruby's childhood exemplifies the lasting impact of facing hatred. Similarly, now I'm going to drop my story with the one-sentence summary. In the short story The Flowers, Alice Walker portrays the rapid coming of age of a young child, Myop, who encounters the remains of a lynched man in the woods as she wanders out to pick a bouquet of flowers. And my thesis. Through the symbol of the flowers, Walker reveals that once a child has witnessed cruelty and hatred, innocence is forever lost. Okay, those are all the pieces of the introduction. I hope this helps, and I wish you lots of great ideas in creating your own hooks that work and introductions that get us going for a great paper.